Maplewood Estates was the kind of neighborhood that seemed plucked straight out of a suburban dream. Rows of identical houses, each painted in soft, neutral colors, stood proudly under the sun. Manicured lawns stretched across every yard like green carpets, trimmed to perfection. The sidewalks were spotless, flower beds carefully arranged, and hedges sculpted with precision. For many, it was more than just a place to live. It was a community built on order, predictability, and shared values. Families moved to Maplewood not only for the houses, but for the sense of pride that came with being part of something immaculate. At the heart of it all was the Homeowners Association, the invisible hand that enforced uniformity. Its rules touched every detail, from the color of shutters to the type of mailbox allowed. To some, it was comforting. To others, it was suffocating. But to live here meant to agree. Maplewood Estates had to remain perfect. The peace, however, was fragile. Beneath the symmetry of the streets and the well-trimmed grass lay the potential for conflict. All it would take was one resident unwilling to play by the rules for the illusion of harmony to fracture. That fracture came in the form of a single lawn. It began innocently enough. A few weeks into summer, the lawn at 214 Willow Court looked a little taller than the rest. Neighbors assumed the homeowner had been busy, perhaps away on vacation. But the days passed, then weeks, and the grass only grew higher. Soon, weeds sprouted among the blades, spreading across the yard like cracks in a perfect surface. Wildflowers appeared, uninvited. Dandelions released their seeds into the breeze, floating across property lines into yards that had been maintained with care. The neat rows of Maplewood Estates now had an anomaly. One property that looked wild, unruly, and defiantly out of step with its surroundings. The Homeowners Association noticed quickly. A letter was drafted, polite yet firm, reminding the resident of his obligations. The grass was to be cut, the weeds removed, the property restored to compliance. The letter went unanswered. Another notice followed, sharper in tone. Then came the fines, $50 per day until the violation was corrected. What began as a small infraction was suddenly a financial weight, yet nothing changed. The grass grew taller, and so did the frustration of those who lived nearby. Joggers crossed the street to avoid brushing against weeds. Parents complained of insects migrating from the yard. Homeowners whispered about falling property values. The lawn had become more than a patch of overgrown grass. It was a challenge to the rules that bound the neighborhood together, and Maplewood Estates was about to find out what happens when one person refuses to yield. The overgrown yard quickly became the center of every conversation. Some residents spoke with outrage, declaring it a disgrace to the community. Others, though fewer, admitted a quiet admiration for the defiance. Block parties turned tense as neighbors debated the issue. Was this about grass or about control? Some saw a threat to property values, while others saw an attack on personal freedom. The lines were drawn, and the neighborhood, once united, began to fracture. The HOA board found itself under siege. Meetings stretched late into the night as members debated how far to push. Letters and emails flooded in, demanding action. Fines continued to accumulate, climbing into the thousands. Then came the word that no one thought possible: foreclosure. The idea that a man could lose his home over an uncut lawn spread like wildfire. Shock turned to fear. Could it happen to anyone? Were the rules meant to protect or to control? The lawn on Willow Court was no longer just a personal choice. It had become a battleground for the identity of Maplewood Estates, and as summer reached its height, so did the conflict. By August, the situation had spiraled. The Johnson property was infamous not just in Willow Court, but across Maplewood Estates. Residents from other streets slowed their cars to see the yard for themselves. Photos circulated online, transforming the once quiet neighborhood into a spectacle. The fines had grown immense, yet the lawn remained untouched. The HOA made its move, hiring attorneys, filing lawsuits, and placing liens. The paperwork was thick, the language severe. The division among residents deepened. Signs appeared on lawns, taking sides. One read, "Protect our property values." Another, "Let him live." Friends became adversaries. Neighbors who had once shared barbecues now avoided one another. Through it all, the Johnson property continued to grow wild. The yard was no longer just uncut grass. It was a symbol. To some, it represented negligence. To others, resistance. The HOA pressed forward, determined to preserve order. But every step came with a cost: financial, emotional, and communal. The association had underestimated how one act of defiance could unravel the bonds of unity. And as the season wore on, the clash between order and rebellion consumed Maplewood Estates. In September, the lawsuit became official. The possibility of losing a home over grass was no longer hypothetical. It was written in legal documents, stamped by the court. The community was exhausted. Arguments had lost their energy, replaced by quiet avoidance. Families who had once argued loudly now spoke less, but the divisions remained. It was then that a new perspective emerged. Local environmental groups took interest, arguing that the yard was not an an eyesore, but an ecosystem. Bees, butterflies, and birds thrived where they could not in the uniform lawns of Maplewood. This idea spread slowly, then caught fire. Perhaps the issue wasn't about neglect, but about redefining beauty. Maybe nature itself had value beyond the manicured perfection the HOA demanded. Faced with rising costs and growing pressure, the board hesitated. The fight that was meant to preserve harmony had nearly destroyed it. They began to consider what once seemed unthinkable: compromise. By late autumn, a deal was struck. The Johnson lawn would remain, but with conditions. Invasive weeds would be removed, the grass trimmed near sidewalks, and a portion transformed into a certified wildflower garden. Signs marked the yard as intentional, not abandoned. It became a sanctuary for pollinators, a splash of color, and a point of curiosity. Some residents were dissatisfied, seeing compromise as surrender. Others felt relief that the battle had ended. Slowly, the community adjusted. Children marveled at butterflies. Visitors admired the uniqueness. The neighborhood, once torn apart, began to heal. The ordeal left its mark. The HOA learned that rules should guide, not suffocate. The residents saw how fragile unity could be, and one man proved that even a lawn could spark a conversation about freedom, individuality, and community values. As winter set in, Maplewood Estates looked peaceful once more. The lawns were neat, the houses tidy, the streets quiet. Yet beneath the frost lay a memory of the summer when grass divided a neighborhood, and the autumn when compromise brought it back together. In that memory was the lesson. A community is not defined by lawns or fences, but by how it resolves conflict and how it learns to live together despite its differences.